everyone, welcome back. I think it's safe to say you're probably here because you're interested in what's going on in the world and how all these crazy global trends, especially taxes, might end up impacting you.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And we've got some really interesting stuff to dig into today.
Definitely.
Like how elections are causing people to quite literally vote with their feet.
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting
We'll
one.
get into that. And also how a centuries-made tax rule is shaking things up big time.
Yeah, that one's going to be a fun one to unpack.
It really is. So basically, in this deep dive, we're going to try to help you understand how all these global tax changes could affect you and give you some things to think about as you plan for your financial future.
Right, exactly. It's all about understanding the big picture. Even if it's just about knowing what options are out there, it can be incredibly empowering.
Totally agree. So let's dive right in. One of the most fascinating things I've been reading about lately is this idea of the great election exodus. It seems like the 2024 elections really got people thinking about moving to different countries like it's some kind of plan B if things don't go their way politically.
Oh, absolutely. It's amazing how politics can have such a huge effect on people's personal decisions. And yeah, that whole Plan B thing is gaining a lot of traction, especially among people who are worried about taxes changing or even just the political climate in general.
Makes sense. So what are people actually doing about it? Besides, doom scrolling on social media.
Well, one thing that's been really interesting to see is how popular these investment migration programs have become.
Investment migration programs?
Yeah. Basically, these programs let people get citizenship or residency in another country if they make a big enough investment.
Interesting.
It could be real estate, or maybe a business venture, or even just putting money into a government fund.
So it's not just about running away from something. It's more about having choices and being able to decide where you want to live and how you want to set up your life, right?
You got it. And of course, taxes are a big part of that. For example, we've seen a lot of wealthy individuals moving out of the UK lately because of some recent changes to their tax system.
Right. I read about that. The UK's got this new government that's really focused on fixing underinvestment, and it looks like they're going to raise taxes to do it.
That's right. And it seems to be making some wealthy people rethink staying there.
Makes sense. So what's going on with their tax system? What's causing all this concern?
Well, they have this thing called the non-domicile regime, which has been around for over 200 years.
Wow, 200 years. That's a long time.
Yeah, they recently made some big changes to it, and it's made a lot of people nervous. The regime basically allowed some residents, mostly wealthy people from other countries, to live in the UK, but only pay UK taxes on the money they earned in the UK.
Oh, wow. So they didn't have to pay UK taxes on all their income worldwide?
Nope, which you could imagine was a pretty sweet deal for some people.
I bet. So are you saying that people who have lived in the UK for a long time, maybe even decades, are now suddenly looking at a much bigger tax bill?
That's the situation. And here's the thing that's really interesting. It's not just people from other countries who are leaving UK citizens are starting to leave too.
Oh, wow. Why is that?
Well, it seems like they're worried this is just the start and that taxes for everyone in the UK are going to keep going up.
So it sounds like moving to another country just because of taxes isn't as easy as just comparing tax rates. There's a lot more to think about.
Oh, yeah. It's way more complicated than that. You've got to consider things like wealth taxes. Some countries have them, some don't. And then there are gift taxes, inheritance taxes, even when you decide to sell something like your house or a business can make a huge difference.
Okay, so how could the timing of selling assets affect your taxes if you're moving?
Well, imagine you're an entrepreneur and you're thinking about selling your company. If you sell it before you move abroad, you could end up owing a lot in capital gains taxes in your home country.
Ah, I see.
But if you're strategic about it and wait to sell it until you're a resident in a new country that has better tax laws, well, you could save a ton of money.
Wow, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought about it like that.
Yeah, and it highlights this really important shift in how we need to think about things. It's not just about taking taxes into account when you decide to move. It's about making where you live a core part of your overall tax planning strategy.
So your lifestyle choices, your financial goals, where you choose to live, it's all connected.
Exactly.
And hey, maybe all this tax planning could even lead you to a beautiful beach somewhere. Who wouldn't want sunshine and savings?
Huh, now you're talking. But even if you're not dreaming of a tropical getaway, the key is to understand that where you live is becoming more and more important when it comes to managing how much you pay in taxes worldwide.
Okay, so we've talked about the UK. What about the US? We all know some of those big tax cuts are set to expire pretty soon. What does that mean for Americans living abroad, especially those who might be thinking about moving?
Well, the U.S. is kind of a special case. The thing is, the U.S. taxes its citizens based on their citizenship, not where they live.
Oh, I've heard about this. So even if you live and work in a different country, you still have to file US taxes.
You got it. And you might even have to pay U.S. taxes on the money you earn worldwide.
Wow. That seems really complicated. So basically, no matter where you go in the world, if you're American, Uncle Sam still wants his cut.
Pretty much, yeah. But there has been some talk about changing this whole citizenship-based taxation system.
Really?
Yeah. The argument is that it puts Americans living abroad at a disadvantage compared to people from other countries who only get taxed on what they earn in the country they live in.
That makes sense.
But there are some big political obstacles to overcome, and it's hard to say if these proposed changes will actually happen.
So there's a lot of uncertainty in the air right now, both in the UK and the US.
Definitely.
It seems like tax policies are changing. Governments are trying to figure out how to get more money, and people are trying to figure out how to deal with it all.
That's exactly it. And all this uncertainty is pushing people to explore their options and be more proactive about managing their taxes. Where you decide to live is becoming a big piece of that puzzle.
Yeah, it's almost like the whole world is playing a giant game of chess.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Everyone trying to guess what's going to happen next and figure out the best strategy.
And the stakes are high, especially for people with a lot of assets. But it's not just about paying less in taxes anymore. It's about your lifestyle, your security, even your political beliefs. People are making decisions based on their values and how they want to live, and taxes are a big part of that.
Right. Remember how we talked about voting with your feet? I think that really gets at what's happening. People are choosing where to live based on what matches their worldview, and taxes are a huge part of that choice.
Absolutely. And all this moving around is having a big impact all over the world.
How so?
Well, countries are competing with each other to attract talented people and businesses, and their tax policies are becoming a major selling point.
So it's a win-win for some countries, right? They get an influx of wealthy people and businesses, which helps their economy grow, and those people get to live a place that fits their values and financial goals.
Yeah, but it also raises some questions about fairness. Some people argue that these countries with really attractive tax policies, sometimes called tax havens, are letting wealthy people avoid paying their fair share back home.
Right.
And that could make wealth inequality worse.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Then again, others argue that these tax havens are actually good for economic growth and individual freedom because they let people keep more of their own money and invest it how they want.
It's a complicated issue for sure, and it really shows how interconnected the global economy is. What happens in one country can have big consequences for others, and tax policies are right in the middle of all that.
Exactly. We're moving away from national borders and towards a more global system, and tax policies are changing right along with it.
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about high net worth individuals and these big global moves. But what about the average person who's not a millionaire jetting off to some exotic island? Do these global tax trends even matter to them?
They do. Even if you're not planning on moving anytime soon, just understanding these trends can help you make smarter financial decisions.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Let's say you're thinking about investing in a company in another country. You need to know what the tax implications are both in that country and in your own country. Or maybe you're working remotely for a company based somewhere else. You need to figure out how that might affect your taxes.
That's a good point. It's about seeing the bigger picture and how it could impact your personal finances, even if you're not directly involved in moving abroad or making big international investments.
Exactly. We live in a globalized world, whether we realize it or not, and we need to adapt our financial strategies accordingly.
So let's bring this back to our listeners. What are some key takeaways they should keep in mind as they try to figure out this ever-changing world of taxes?
You're right, it can be a lot to take in. I think the most important thing is to stay informed, keep up with the latest news and changes in global tax policies, especially if you're thinking about moving or investing abroad.
So subscribe to some reputable newsletters or podcasts.
Exactly, like this one chuckles.
Gotta get that plug in there. But seriously, staying informed is key.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to ask for professional advice. A qualified tax advisor can help you understand this complicated global tax system and come up with a plan that works for you.
Yeah, it's like having a tour guide in a foreign country. They know the lay of the land, they speak the language, and they can help you avoid getting lost.
Exactly. And remember, things are always changing. What's true today might not be true tomorrow. So stay flexible, keep learning, and be ready to adapt your strategies as needed.
Well said. It's all about being proactive and taking control of your financial future. And speaking of the future, any predictions about what we might see happening in the next few years? I'm sure you've got that crystal ball somewhere.
Haha. Well, predictions are always tough. But I do think we're going to see more transparency and cooperation between countries when it comes to enforcing tax laws.
Interesting.
Yeah, the days of hiding money in secret offshore accounts are coming to an end. Technology is making it harder and harder to keep financial secrets.
It's like trying to hide in plain sight in the digital age.
Exactly. And governments are working together to close those loopholes and catch people who are trying to cheat on their taxes. So if you're thinking about trying to get away with something, I wouldn't recommend it. It's just not worth the risk.
Good to know. It's always better to play by the rules, both ethically and financially.
Absolutely. And I think we'll also see a bigger focus on sustainable taxations. Governments are feeling the pressure to raise money in a way that's fair, equitable, and supports long-term economic growth.
Sounds like a tall order.
It is. It means finding ways to tax wealth and income that don't discourage innovation or investment. It's a delicate balance.
Like trying to find that sweet spot between generating revenue and making sure the economy keeps humming along.
Exactly. And it's a challenge that policymakers all over the world are facing. But it's an important conversation to have because the way we tax ourselves has a huge impact on our societies and our economies.
Right. It affects everything from schools and healthcare to infrastructure and social programs.
Exactly. It's not just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about finding solutions that benefit everyone, not just a select few.
It's really inspiring to see people taking a stand and demanding change. It gives me hope for the future.
Me too. It reminds us that we all have a role to play in creating the world we want to live in.
Okay, so we've covered the trends, the challenges, the potential solutions. What's this all mean for our listeners on a personal level? What can they actually do to navigate this complex and ever-changing world?
That's a great question. I think the most important thing is to be proactive. Don't wait for the tax authorities to come knocking. Take the time to understand your own tax situation, explore your options, and develop a plan that aligns with your financial goals and values.
Good advice. Knowledge is power, and taking control of your financial future is incredibly empowering.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to ask for help from a qualified professional. A good tax advisor can be incredibly valuable, especially if you're dealing with complicated international tax issues. They can help you understand all the rules and make sure you're doing everything right.
Sometimes it's best to leave it to the pros, right?
Exactly. And remember, tax planning isn't a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process that needs to be reviewed and adjusted as your life changes. Things happen, and your tax strategy needs to be flexible enough to adapt.
So stay informed, stay proactive, and get professional guidance when you need it.
You got it. And don't forget to enjoy the ride. The world of finance can be really interesting and rewarding, even when it comes to taxes. It's all about perspective.
It's kind of funny how we started talking about voting with your feet, and now we're deep in the weeds of global tax systems.
Yeah, it is kind of funny.
Really shows how everything is connected these days, don't you think?
It really does. Like all these choices about where to live and how to manage your money, they have a ripple effect on the whole world.
Exactly, and it gives people a whole new set of things to consider. It's not just about paying the least amount of taxes anymore.
Right.
It's about making financial choices that actually match up with your personal values and how you see your future.
I completely agree. It's like we're shifting from this purely practical view of taxes to a more well-rounded one.
Hmm.
People are thinking about where they want to live, how they want to contribute to the world, and what kind of legacy they want to leave behind. Taxes are just one part of that bigger picture.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all this?
That's a good question. I think the main message is this. The world is changing, and we need to change the way we think about taxes too. That old idea of just trying to pay as little as possible just doesn't cut it anymore. It's about strategic planning, it's about being aware of what's happening globally, and it's about making sure your financial decisions line up with your values and goals.
That's a really powerful message. It's about taking charge of your financial future and making choices that reflect who you are and what you want.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And understanding that taxes are just one piece of a much bigger puzzle.
Right.
They're tied to your lifestyle choices, your investment strategies, even your political views.
So it's not just about the numbers. It's about understanding the bigger picture and how everything fits together.
Right. And it's about being proactive and ready to adapt. The world of taxes is always changing, so you got to be willing to change with it.
Well said. It's like sailing in uncharted waters.
I like that.
You need to be ready for anything and be able to navigate through rough seas.
Exactly. And like any good sailor, you need the right tools and knowledge to stay afloat. That means staying informed about what's happening with taxes worldwide, getting advice from professionals when you need it, and always being willing to reevaluate your financial plan.
Great advice. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. As the world gets more and more connected, the lines between countries are blurring, and what it means to call a place home is changing. How might this new perspective change your financial decisions? Where do you see yourself fitting into this evolving world? It's something to think about as you explore this exciting and constantly changing world of global finance.
It really is a world full of both opportunities and challenges. The key is to be curious, to be open-minded, and to be willing to embrace the unknown.
I couldn't agree more. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into global taxes and the shifting trends we're seeing. We'll see you next time for another fascinating look at the world around us.